The silence in that hall pressed down like lead, a living weight on every soul. The old man beside the straw mat shuddered, smashed his forehead against the cold floor tiles with a dull, sickening thud, and his voice tore raw and ragged from his throat. My lord, it is not so. My daughter has always kept herself pure. How could she have stooped to such debauchery? I beg you, restore her honor, grant her justice. Magistrate Liu of the row of scrutiny let the silence stretch like a drawn bowstring, then spoke slow and measured. Madame Wang died by her own hand, by hanging. There is no direct link to Soren, this case. The Bureau will investigate further. The words drifted through the hall like feathers meant to soothe, but they gouged into the old man's chest like a drawn blade. He crumpled to the ground, his face the grey of cold ash, his lips struggling to form words, but only a thin dying whimper leaked out, injustice. My daughter has been wronged. Soren rose slowly and cupped his hands in a casual salute. If there is nothing else, I will take my leave. He had barely taken 2 steps when a cold voice sliced through the hall from the entrance. Hold. The gathered crowd fell utterly. Lie silent, and in the rustle of shifting robes, the onlookers parted, a narrow passage tearing itself open. A figure strode in at a steady pace, Asher, his steps unhurried, the soles of his shoes tapping a crisp rhythmic beat against the flagstones. He cupped his hands to Magistrate Liu first, then let his gaze drop to the body shrouded in white. Before Magistrate Liu could speak, Asher raised a finger and aimed it at the corpse, his voice low but every word striking the ears of everyone in the hall with perfect clarity. Hen, a person hangs herself. Her feet dangle limp and point to the ground, but these feet are stiff and directed at the heavens. Proof she was dead before she was strung up, and had been for some time, and moreover, a suicide's tongue protrudes, the face turns a livid ghastly purple, yet if death preceded the hanging, the tongue retracts and the face remains pure. Ale so suicide or posthumous suspension lift that shroud and you will know at once. The instant his words landed, Soren's steps halted as if snagged, his pupils contracted. So be our If a flicker, it almost escaped notice, then his usual mask of indifference slipped back into place. Magistrate Liu's eyes turned razor sharp, and he studied Asher for a long heartbeat before swinging his glare toward the coroner huddled in a corner. He speaks the truth. The coroner stayed silent for a long moment, then bowed his head. Yes, my lord, it is precisely as he says. Magistrate Liu lifted a hand. Pull back the shroud. A bailiff strode forward, snatched a corner of the cloth, and yanked it away, bearing the woman's face, delicate and pale, poised as if in peaceful sleep. Our tongues sitting deep within her mouth, not a trace visible. The air in the hall clenched thick and heavy, and Magistrate Liu's fingers curled slowly around his gavel as he drew a long breath and declared, his voice a low rumble, This case is riddled with doubt. Young Master Soren, you cannot yet clear your name. I must ask you to endure this inconvenience. Soren smiled, a faint, untroubled curve. It is nothing. I trust you will see justice done, my lord. The gavel slammed down with a heavy crack, and flanked by 2 bailiffs, Soren turned and strode out of the hall. As he crossed the threshold, he paused just for a breath and glanced back at Asher, a look holding no emotion, but its chill, a sliver of ice drawn slowly down Asher's spine. Asher was about to step from the hall when a hand clamped onto him and hauled him into the archives. Archivist Chen glared down at him, brows knotted, his muted voice straining with barely leashed fury. What sort of fool bravado is this? You think the coroner couldn't tell, UTH Inc. The magistrate didn't know this case reeked of foul play. Everyone else held their tongues, only you had to flash your cleverness. Asher blinked, then swiftly placed the man. Only his father's old friend who managed the archives would speak to him with such heat, and he feigned confusion. Uncle! If Magistrate Liu knew she was murdered, why did he say nothing? Archivist Chen drew a tight breath, the words caught in his throat like thorns. That Soren is the son of Earl Dorian, the magistrate cannot afford to offend him, and you even less with the disruption you've stirred up. House of Kin might very well carry a Digi against you. He paused, and his voice softened a shade. Still, don't panic over much. House of Kin can smooth this over without great trouble. Your House of Lin may have fallen, but you're still a noble line. They likely won't dare move against you outright, but mark this. From now on, don't entangle yourself in such affairs. He waved a dismissive hand and walked off. Asher sank back into a corner of the archives, the pale face of that woman in the hall, and the old man's thudding forehead against the floor still churning in his skull. He had known full well that the entire Bureau of Scrutiny already understood this case, known that stepping forward would hardly stir a ripple. But when he saw that rigid corpse laid out in the center of the hall, saw the old man trembling like a brittle leaf, he had stepped forward anyway. Some things must be done, even when you know they will change nothing. Asher did not brood on it. The thought flickered through his mind and settled. He needed only to face his own conscience without shame. When he emerged from the Bureau of Scrutiny, the gate was already choked with a dense press of commoners, and the old man caught sight of Asher and threw himself to his knees in dust, pounding his forehead into the dirt with heavy resounding thuds. "Thank you, my lord, for vindicating my daughter." "Thank you, my lord." The crowd's murmuring swelled and fused into a searing wave of noise, no distinct words, just a low-layered roar of gratitude, tangled with sobs and coarse T.S. and on countless weathered faces, eyes burned fiercely. Asher stooped and grasped the old man's arms with both hands, the shoulders thin and hard beneath the ragged cloth, the tremors traveling into his palms, and he hauled the old man upright and said, his voice level, "Elder, no thanks are needed. It was simply my duty." Barely managing to extract himself from the crowd, Asher did not wait for his guard Magnus to fetch him, but set off alone toward Lynn Mansion in the commoner's quarter. At dinner, two figures closed in around Asher. His mother, Vienna, ceaselessly piled food into his bowl, her voice thick with ache. "Zeor, eat more. You've grown thin these past days." His father, Nelav Lin T, laid down his chopsticks and spoke in a grave tone. "Tomorrow I will summon an imperial physician to examine this amnesia of yours." Asher shook his head. "There is no need. That's a heavy expense." Nelav Lin T brushed the concern aside with a wave. "Coin is no concern of yours. Healing is what matters." He personally ladled a bowl of chicken soup and set it before Asher. "Your mother brewed this with her own hands. Drink it down." Asher took up the spoon in silence, the warm broth sliding through him, blooming a long, forgotten heat in his chest. In his past life, he had scraped by on takeaway and instant noodles. It had been an age since he had tasted such a home-cooked meal or sat at a shared table. Their care unsettled him. Those things he had never felt from his own blood parents were now held out to him by two strangers. To escape the awkwardness of their attention, early the next morning Asher left Lynn Mansion. Bureau of Scrutiny, Archives. Asher closed the case file slowly. The woman's matter was settled yesterday. A thief had walked in and confessed, claimed he'd broken in the night before, taken by sudden lust, and strangled Madame Wang by accident. And to cover his tracks, he staged a hanging. With a culprit in hand, Soren walked free. The file reeked of fabrication. No thief needed to confess. The Bureau of Scrutiny would never have traced him. He walked into the trap willingly, the motive painted in blood, to scrub Soren clean. The first count's reach stretched further than Asher had ever feared. Asher slid the file into its place and left the archives, and in the courtyard a figure strode toward him. He halted, hands coming together in a brief salute. "Magistrate Liu, sir." Magistrate Liu's face was lean, his gaze a blade, and Asher met it without lowering his eyes. A moment passed, then Liu looked away, gave a curt nod, and walked past as though yesterday's storm had never broken. Asher looked back, no open censure. On the surface the waters were still, but a knife in the dark was always possible. He left the Bureau of Scrutiny and headed straight for the Academy of Esoteric Arts. A figure blocked the entrance. Soren faced him. A smile slashed across his face, cold as a midwinter blade. "Peace, Earl Nelav Lin T's son. Aren't you full of clever tricks?" Had Asher not intervened yesterday, Soren would never have rotted 2 hours in that cell, and the first county heir had lost face, a few questions, and he'd peeled Asher's identity bare. Asher wasted no words. "What do you want?" Soren lifted his right hand, a brittle crackle, and beneath the skin plates of ochre armor wept from his flesh-like stone-taking form, sheathing his entire arm in a heartbeat. His smile was a wound. "You locked me in that piss-reeking cell for 2 hours, so I'll snap 2 of your ribs. Seems a fair trade, don't you think?" Asher's pupils tightened. A duel. Awakened adept, he was outclassed, and he retreated a step, voice dropping to iron. "The Academy of Esoteric Arts forbids combat." Soren's sneer was a blade's edge. "The Academy's rules say so, yes, but we're standing just outside." And the words were still hanging in the air when his fist drove at Asher's chest. The blow struck his face. Muscles coiled for a brace, then sagged. Soren saw surrender, poured force into the punch. Then, ice. A shard of cold bit deep. Air froze. Mist from their lips. Ice shattered under Soren's feet, a hungry maw spreading, encasing him in frozen prison. And a trail of faint perfume. Drifting closer, Lyra moved before Asher. Her wintry stare pinned Soren. She spoke, each word a dropping icicle. "You mean to break 2 of his ribs." Soren lost feeling below his knees. A frozen abyss. Body rattling, jaw hammering. He cried out, his voice cracking. "The Academy forbids esoteric assault." "Let me go." Lyra's voice held the frost of a tombstone. "Its rules say so." "But..." We're outside. As her words fell, her skirt lashed out. A sharp crack. Foot slammed into Soren's chest. Wet crunch. Ribs shattered. He soared back, smashed to the ground in a spray of ice. More than one rib snapped. Soren shoved himself up on one hand, other pressed to chest, face a rictus of agony. Pallid yellow light bled from his skin, palm over broken ribs. Light pulsed. Wet, scraping noise, bones stirred, fused. He sucked a shuddering breath, venomous glance at Lyra, then eyes locked on Asher. His smile a poisoned needle. He spoke, words dripping venom. You should know something. That woman? I did kill her. Asher's world narrowed. Heart hammered, a fist inside his chest. Roar of blood filled his skull. Soren's cold laugh trailed as he walked away. Asher stood rooted. Fists crushed to white, knuckled stones, small bones grinding. Lyra watched Soren vanish, turned to Asher with a frown. She asked, voice cool. How did you manage to draw his ire? Asher didn't answer. Eyes tracked the empty path. Another question from Lyra. What power was that? Lyra sniffed. A low-grade stone art, nothing more. Once you break through your next awakening, he'll be dust beneath your feet. Soren had dragged the day through the mud. But hunger in Asher's eyes burned like a new, lit flame. Silent for a long breath, then lifted his head. His words low and urgent. Training like before today, Lyra shook her head. Beyond the limb, it is ruin. 2 more days. Your body would break. Stubbornness hardened his voice, though it stayed low. I can take it, he met her gaze. She held his eyes a moment, then relented. Soon the rear chamber door of Lynn Mansion swung open. Lyra stood behind Asher, hand white as jade against his back. Frost power surged. Air bit deep. Rime frosted window frames. Cold tide bored through his meridians, needle, shards of ice worming into marrow. Asher's body seized. Jaw locked. Frost-furred eyebrows. Breath plumed white steam. Arms wrapped around himself, shudders racking, knuckles bleached bone, white. Each pulse of cold, clawing deeper, wrenched fresh spasms. Words ground through locked teeth. Lyra? A little less. I'm at my limit. Lyra regarded him with a cold eye. She spoke, voice ice. Forgotten so soon, Soren's sneering face flared in his mind. Asher bit down, jaw aching. Snarled. Do it. I can take more. Rime thickened on his brow, thawed by stubborn heat, tracking down his face like silent tears. In another chamber, Nelav Lin T exhaled a heavy sigh. He spoke, voice weary. House Zhao has soared far beyond us. Lingjun's esoteric art has awakened 5 times, I hear. Zeur is no match. A pause. Voice sinking. Better to break this betrothal before it strangles both sides. Find Zeur a wife of proper standing, and let the house of Lin's line endure. Vienna sat in silence. At last, she nodded. At supper, Nelav Lin T and his wife raised the matter. Asher's chopsticks stilled a single breath. Then he spoke, flat and calm. Father, mother, decide as you think best. No more words. He set down his bowl, rose, and walked away. His face a closed door. Afternoon sun hung high. Asher plunged into the Academy of Esoteric Arts library, riffled through records of stone anomalies, stopped only when the deep toll of the closing bell echoed, slid the final volume onto its shelf. Rose. Hour of the boar drew near. Towering gates of the imperial city groaned shut, thud shaking earth. Magnus dozed against outer wall, roused by approach. Rubbed eyes, mumbled. Young master, what kept you so late? Asher offered no explanation. Just 2 words. Let's go back. They walked from eastern to western quarter. Night curdled around them. High gates and lanterns of noble estates receded, swallowed by gloom. Road flanked by huddled, low-roofed dwellings. Streets empty. Western ward rarely knew peace after dark. Occasional distant bark. Only footfalls rang out, lonely on worn flagstones. Magnus chattered idly. Asher listened in silence. One more narrow alley, and home. From shadows at alley's mouth, a dog snarled. A mangy stray, trembling against wall, throat rattling with stuttered whimpers, aimed toward alley's depths. Magnus flinched, cursing. Damned mutt scared me half to death. He stepped forward. Asher stopped dead. Magnus glanced back. Young master locked in place, pupils tightening to pinpricks. Wind died. Air froze solid. Chill crawled up Asher's spine, lancing into skull. Magnus heard only a dog's yelp, but Asher's ears caught clear, whispered words. That man's been hiding in the alley all this time. What's he planning? Barely a yard from the alley's mouth, he seized Magnus. Suffocating silence. Then a cold gleam detonated in the murk. A venom-drenched throwing knife shrieked through the air, straight for Asher's brow. Young master, look out. Magnus's pupils dilated. Body before mind, he hurled his bulk into Asher, shoving clear. The blade sliced past Asher's temple, buried itself in Magnus's shoulder with a wet thwack. Blood sprayed black, soaking half his sleeve. Poisoned. Viciously, lethally poisoned. Magnus swayed. Something feral, desperate flared behind his eyes. Ripped the knife free, bellowed through clenched teeth. Young master, run. Before the words died, he launched forward like a maddened bull. Stone beneath his feet cracked with a force, a dull boom punching the air. Muscles swelled along his back, tunic straining, body a blur of shade, hurtling at the masked figure. Assassin barely found footing. No time to evade. An instant later, Magnus's shoulder plowed into his chest with brutal finality. In the lacerating quiet of midnight street, crunch of shattering bone. Obscenely loud. Assassin's ribcage collapsed inward, deformed into a grotesque hollow. Impossible to count fractures. Body lifted clean off ground, mist of blood and pulped innards blasting from mouth. Above the mask, eyes bulged, round and stark. Not understanding how this ordinary guard could possess such bestial impact. Didn't finish his gurgle. Dropped limp and lifeless, dead before hitting stones. Magnus stumbled to a halt, trying to turn, see Asher. Knees buckled. Crashed down like a falling mountain. Poison racing through veins. Color drained, lips turning sickly cyan. Drained of all strength, he blacked out. Morning light bled over rooftops of Lynn Mansion. Magnus sprawled across the bed. Face a mottled bruise of dark purple. Breath scraping, blade dragging over gravel. Poisoned darts mark branded into flesh. Archivist Chen of the Bureau of Scrutiny strode in. Footsteps quick and hushed. Voice low. The assassin's been identified. A repeat offender, wanted by the Imperial Court for years. Multiple murders chained to his name. A pause. Quieter. He died on the spot. Sun's tackle would have dropped an elephant. Nelav Lin T's expression hardened to iron. Pressed Archivist Chen for suspects. The archivist mentioned House of Kin. Shot down before the words left his mouth. House of Kin nursed a grudge against Asher, true. But they'd never touch the untouchable line of assassinating nobility. That road led to one destination, extermination of their entire bloodline. Asher stood to the side, face a mask of stone. Beneath it, a colder current stirred. House Zhao. If he died, marriage contract dissolved on its own. Clean. Efficient. Most elegant way to preserve honor. Crushed the thought down. Gaze settled back on Magnus. A carriage rattled to a halt beyond the gate. Moments later, a figure in white stepped into the courtyard. A girl, perhaps 16 or 17. Oval face softened by gentle lines. Hair bound in twin loops, pinned low. White silk ribbons threaded through coils trembled with each step. Beneath a delicate fringe, eyes held the near-transparent stillness of a frozen lake. Remote, untroubled, seeing everything and nothing at once. She announced herself from the Imperial Medical Hall. Voice soft, unburdened by arrogance. The crowd parted. She approached the bed. Gaze fell on Magnus's darkened face. Pressed her palm directly to his forehead without ceremony. Beneath her hand, a pale milky luminescence bloomed, spread like moonlight seeping through skin. The black poison writhed upon Magnus's flesh. It fought. Corruption thrashed and peeled, ripped from his skin as if torn by invisible hooks. His ragged breath settled, slow and steady. Color flushed back into his cheeks, the warmth of living flesh. Asher stared. His throat moved in a silent swallow. Healing power. No mere medicine. This was an anomaly whispered of in half-forgotten legends, a force that mocked poison, laughed at disease, stretched a lifespan far beyond mortal bounds, and could drag a soul from the very edge of death. She withdrew her hand. Pale glow shimmered at her palm, and something inside Asher caught fire. The hunger burned so hot it threatened to leak from his pupils. If this ability were his, he forced himself not to salivate. Every ounce of willpower clamped his expression steady. He wanted it. Gods, how he wanted it. In that moment, he wished he were the one lying on that bed, her palm pressed to his forehead, that dreamlike power seeding itself into his body. But there was no trading places. Frost crystallized along the eaves. The afternoon sun licked it away. The girl in white climbed into her carriage. Wheels ground over flagstones, and she was gone. Asher stood at the manor gate, fingers clenching and unclenching in his sleeves. If the poison had struck him instead, he would never have survived. And if he wanted another chance to copy her ability, he would need an excuse to see her again. A thought flickered higher an assassin, a calculated wound. The Imperial Medical Hall would dispatch her once more. He crushed it the instant it surfaced. His gaze followed the carriage until it vanished around the corner. Then a voice sliced through the air from behind. Each syllable was edged with frost. If you can't bear to see her go, you could always chase after her. The atmosphere froze solid. Asher turned. Lyra leaned against the stone lion by the gate, arms folded across her chest. Her eyes were a lake sealed under winter ice. Within 3 feet of where she stood, the summer heat had been driven back by a wordless chill. Fine frost dusted the ground at her feet. Her lips barely moved. Half a day and you're already sniffing at flowers. Asher reined in the tightness in his chest. Assassins came last night. Dolly took the poison meant for me. The Imperial Medical Hall physician saved him. He just woke. Assassins. The ice in Lyra's eyes shattered. She closed the distance in one stride. Are you hurt? I'm fine. Dolly still bedridden. Lyra bit down on her lower lip. A name ground out between her teeth like a curse. Soren. She spun on her heel and walked. Her bound hair carved a cold arc through the air. Asher did not stop her. Soren might not be the mastermind, but the man had a beating long overdue. Lingian knew how to hold back. He would survive. He just would not enjoy it. By the time Asher returned to the room, Magnus was hunched over a table piled with meat, devouring it like a starved wolf. Asher clasped his shoulder and said only thanks. Nelav Linti appeared at the door, calling him away. There were matters to discuss. In the study, Nelav Linti and Vienna sat facing each other. After a weighted silence, Nelav Linti spoke. Zia, do you recall the marriage arrangement with House Zhao? Asher nodded. I was going to bring it up. Let's dissolve it. House Zhao has risen far beyond us now. We would only shame ourselves reaching. Better to sever ties cleanly. It serves both families. Relief softened Nell of Lin T's face. He opened his mouth to suggest another match, but Asher cut him off. I'm still young. There's no rush. He excused himself with a muttered complaint about stomach pain and slipped out, slamming the door on the words, "Give me grandchildren." On the long avenue of the imperial capital, Soren emerged from a tavern with 2 attendants trailing behind him. The dull ache in his ribs was a living reminder of yesterday's humiliation. He was already plotting his revenge when a bone, deep cold, crawled up his spine without warning. Dust swirled up from the street before it could settle. It froze into tiny crystals of ice. Soren's head snapped up. Lyra stood 5 paces away. Her voice fell like a blade. Asher was attacked. Was it you? Soren blinked. Then his face split with savage delight. Asher was attacked. Is he dead? The words never finished. Moisture in the air condensed, visible to the naked eye. Soren lurched backward, but a blast of killing cold detonated around his ankles. Ice surged upward like a living thing, swallowing his boots, climbing his shins, sheathing his knees. His robes shattered into a web of frozen cracks. Chill bit through to the marrow. His joints screamed. The grin froze on his face, even as his pupils shrank to pinpricks. Wasn't me, I swear it wasn't me. His voice tore into a shriek. Lyra did not let him finish. Her toe tapped the ground. The ice encasing Soren's chest exploded inward with the sound of snapping bamboo. The 2 ribs that had just been reset broke again. His body folded like a crumpled insect. The howl that ripped from his throat was strangled on the spot by a lungful of freezing air, reduced to a strangled wheeze, a breath cut short. The street patrol guards glanced over. One look, and they turned in perfect unison, melting into a side alley. Lyra withdrew her foot. Ice shards sifted from her boot soles like falling snow. Wind moved through the trees in Lin Mansion's courtyard. When Lyra returned, the chill still clung to her cuffs. Asher offered her a cup of hot tea. She did not take it. "How's Soren?" he asked. Her words were flat. A few more ribs broken. Silence stretched between them. Then Asher spoke low. "Truth is, last night's attack probably wasn't him." Lyra lifted her gaze. The frost in her eyes had thawed, leaving only calm in dark stillness. In the cold air, she exhaled a thread of white breath. Her voice was soft. "I know." Asher stared. "You knew? And you still broke more of his ribs." Her gaze settled on his face, steady as a level blade. "I've already heard what the Bureau of Scrutiny uncovered. A man like that deserves to die 100 times over." Breaking a few ribs was mercy. Asher said nothing more. A different question surfaced in his mind. He shifted the conversation. "That assassin yesterday, something was strange." One punch, and the air exploded. A sonic boom. But his ability didn't seem like a strength-type anomaly. What kind of path was that? Lyra did not answer with words. She threw a punch. Boom. The air detonated with a muffled thunderclap, the sound hammering right beside his eardrums. On the nearby table, the surface of the tea quaked. Delicate ripples slammed against the cup's walls. An invisible wave of force pushed at Asher's robes, lifting the hem and sending it rippling backward. She pulled her fist back and straightened. Residual energy trembled at her knuckles like fading sparks. "True, Kai," she said. "Power forged through martial cultivation. It's not the same source as anomalies." Asher's brow lifted. These past days, he had been drowning in the study of anomalies. He knew the Academy of Esoteric Arts had a sister institution, the Academy of Martial Arts, but he had never dug deeper. Lyra continued, her voice carrying the weight of ancient truth. The martial path was a different road entirely. It relied on nothing heaven, granted only the sweat and blood of mortals, refined through thousands of years of brutal trial. An anomaly user could move mountains and drain seas, but a martial cultivator at the peak could split a mountain with a single sword stroke. Yet the path was brutal beyond measure. Those who climbed to its heights were rarer than phoenix feathers. That was why the world heard so little of them. By the time she finished, Asher's mind was already working. His anomaly was still useless in combat, but the martial path, with a body far surpassing ordinary men, his progress should outstrip most. At that same moment, inside Kin Manor, Soren was cursing under his breath as he staggered into the courtyard. 2 days of beatings had left his bones feeling like a shattered vase, barely held together. Before entering his chambers, he snarled at the servants' no disturbances, not even if the sky fell. Then he shut the door behind him. 2 steps toward the bed. He froze. There was someone else in the room. A woman in black. Almond eyes, a fine nose, features of striking beauty. Her long hair was bound high. But there was nothing soft about her, only the honed edge of a blade. She stood in the corner like she had grown there, her breathing indistinguishable from the shadows. Soren's pupils contracted to points. Before he had entered, that corner had been unmistakably empty. "Who are you?" His voice came out sharp. The woman's gaze drifted past him, fixing on something in the empty air. Her voice scraped like a sliver of ice against glass. "I have come to retrieve something." Soren retreated half a step. "What thing?" She looked at him at last. The words fell flat and calm. "Your worthless life." The sword made no sound. Soren felt a chill kiss his throat. Then eternal night swallowed his vision. His corpse pitched forward. The woman dispersed like smoke. Only a few flower petals remained where she had stood, scattered on his collar, white as funeral paper. The morgue of the Bureau of Scrutiny. Asher had not expected that Soren's promise of meeting again would lead him here, to a stiffening corpse laid out on a wooden slab. Soren's face was the color of old ash. A fine line crossed his throat, stretching from one side to the other. The wound's edges curled outward, the flesh a dark, bruised crimson near purple. Frost, like blood crusts, clung to the cut, as if the gash had been carved not by steel, but by a blade of killing cold that froze the flesh as it parted. A trace of residual energy still hung in the air, dragging the morgue's chill down another few degrees. The coroner bowed low, his voice a dry rustle. "The fatal wound is a single slash across the throat. A short sword or a dagger. Death came in an instant. No signs of struggle. Only a few flower petals strewn at the scene. Nothing else. Lyra and Asher stood before the officials, questioned with clipped efficiency. At the hour of Soren's death, both had been within Lynn Manor, surrounded by witnesses. Neither possessed the means, nor the uncanny skill, to slip past a Viscount's guards and deliver such a precise, silent blow. Magistrate Liu lifted a weary hand and waved them away. An official stared down at the corpse, his murmur barely a breath. One slash to the throat. Flower petals left behind. That woman has struck again. Magistrate Liu silenced him with a sharp cut of his palm. This is no ordinary murder. Transfer the case to the Bureau of Arcane Affairs. As Asher passed the body, he seized a sliver of a moment when every eye was averted. His palm pressed flat against Soren's cold brow. The power inside him lay dormant as dead water. A void? Empty? No flicker of response. He withdrew his hand without a trace of expression, and a silent sigh coiled inward. It seemed the abilities of the dead could not be stolen. Back within the dusty hush of the archives, Archivist Chen was nursing a cup of tea. Asher did not circle the question. Uncle Chen? Who killed Soren? Archivist Chen took a slow, deliberate sip before answering. A ghost of an assassin. Over the past year, many nobles and officials in the imperial capital have fallen to her blade. The Bureau of Arcane Affairs and the Secret Investigation Service are hunting her even now. That she set her sights on Soren. Well, consider it his own rotten luck finally catching up. Asher walked deeper into the stacks. The air thickened moldering paper and old ink, fermenting in the dim vaults like a quiet, invisible violence. He searched for a long time before pulling a thin volume from the sea of case files, a secret dossier. The records within painted a stark picture. The assassin was female. Her chosen weapon, a short sword or dagger. An expert in stealth and concealment, she likely possessed an anomaly that suppressed her presence, an ability awakened at least 3 times. Her martial cultivation was substantial, though not at the unrivaled peak. She rarely failed. The only 2 documented retreats occurred when hidden protectors shadowed her targets. Every soul who ever glimpsed her true face died on her blade. The dead she left behind were countless. But not one was innocent. Corrupt nobles. Butchering officials. Men like Soren criminals, stained with atrocities that the court had quietly pardoned and set free beyond the law's reach. Asher closed the dossier. Old paper grit clung to his fingertips. His pupils tightened. What rose in his chest was not fear. It was a chill, solemn admiration. On the case file, the ink for the word concealment still seemed to flow with fresh killing intent. Every time she struck, she left a flower petal at the scene, never a single exception. It was her only signature left to the world, and it severed all possibility of framing another. Asher's fingertip traced the line of script. Beneath the pad of his finger, the paper's surface rippled with a shimmer so faint the naked eye could barely catch it, as though he had touched a layer of folded space. The air shivered. Even the flame of the oil lamp flinched. He pulled his hand back, a flicker of unease passing through his eyes. At least a third awakening of the mystic art, seamlessly fused with shadow. At martial training, and she became the deadliest ghost in the entire imperial capital. An unseen assassin who could guard against such a thing. Ache! The name burst into Asher's mind along with that red and blue canyon and the maddening exclamation mark. Back then, he'd once climbed to the top of the realm's ranked server with Ache, knowing first, and the lethal thrill of a total vanish followed by a single, crushing kill. The woman in this file carried a bounty of 10,000 taels, enough for an ordinary family to live on for generations. A hero, then, he shut the dossier, tapping a knuckle lightly on the worn cover. A wretch like Soren, how he had longed to finish the man with his own hands. Pity he lacked the strength. And so Soren had strutted on, unchecked. Not long after, Asher stepped out of the Bureau of Scrutiny. The growl in his gut swelled, amplified by the clamor of the streets. Sunlight slanted over eaves, shattering into swaying flecks of gold across the ground. The corpse carted away from the House of Kin early that morning had thrown the entire city into a boiling froth. Voices, kept low, could hardly contain raw satisfaction. A fine death, the heavens have finally opened their eyes. Whoever the good fellow was who dealt heaven's justice, I, old Kyan, raise a bowl to him. Asher found a street, corner breakfast stall. The bamboo steamer lid lifted, releasing a blast of white steam skyward, carrying the scents of meat, dough, and the sweat of the marketplace. He sat down and ordered stuffed buns and rice porridge. The other patrons recognized him, one by one falling silent. The young lord who had spoken righteous words for Madame Wang sat among them now. His clothes were simple, yet pressed and neat, setting him apart like a polished blade among rusted tools. But soon they recognized that unforgettable face, so startlingly handsome. The murmurs died mid-whisper, transmuted into a hush of reverence. No one dared approach. The wall between official and commoner stood stark, even in the steam of pork buns. Asher ate his portion, then had the stall owner wrap up several trays to take back to the bureau. Today's emergency had left many colleagues without a sip of water or a grain of rice. Bring some buns, close the distance a little. When he went to pay, the brawny stall owner pushed his hand back, coarse palms with an unarguable strength. The lord spoke up for old Wang's daughter. These buns are on me. Asher froze, about to protest, but the owner's voice dropped, hard as stone. That girl was pure all her life. A villain destroyed her, then smeared her with filth. You alone stepped forward to cry her grievance. I cannot take your coin for these. Other diners added their voices in agreement. In the end, Asher could only bow thanks and accept. Back at the bureau, he handed out the buns to each office. The stale reek of official documents and aging timber was torn open by tendrils of warm, fragrant steam. The buns had thin skins and fat fillings. A faint sheen of oil leaked through the paper, drawing a collective roll of throats. In the archives, 3 scribes were faint with hunger. Seeing Asher approach with food, they swarmed. Thank you, Lord Lin. This is coal in a snowstorm. We were just about to send a runner to the market. Each took a bun, biting into a mouthful of warmth. What grew warmer than the buns was the subtle chill between them, thawed by common food. Scribe Zhu finished his, wiped his hands, and with a smile asked the cost. Asher waved it off. A matter of a few coppers. Not worth mentioning, Scribe Zhu persisted. Even blood brothers settle accounts clearly. Otherwise, none of us would dare trouble Lord Lin next time. Asher shook his head, voice lowering. Truly, there's no need. I spent not a single coin. The owner gave them. He said Madame Wang was a neighbor. He wanted to thank me for speaking for her that day. The 3 scribes all stiffened. Scribe Zhu's hand, already reaching for a second bun, hovered in the air. Then he slowly drew it back to the paper wrap. He fell silent, withdrawing his hand, his Adam's apple working. At last, he rasped, in that case. We have no right to eat these. Asher sighed softly, gaze drifting to the swaying tree shadows beyond the window. I'm unworthy of them too. That thief was a scapegoat. Madame Wang's honor was never truly restored. She died carrying a false name, a pure girl, forcibly violated, and then silenced. The killer hired a burglar to take the blame, and the file still recorded voluntary transaction, thief's lust, filth like that. Think of her family, and a coil of foul heat twisted in Asher's chest. Magistrate Liu had appeared at the archive's doorway without anyone noticing. He stared at the half-eaten bun in his hand, silent a long moment. Then he stuffed the remaining half into his mouth all at once, chewed with brutal force, and swallowed. His throat rolled like he was gulping down something heavy. He turned, robes snapping. His palm slammed flat against the door frame. No deliberate channeling of martial essence, yet the dull reverberation made near by bailiffs flinch. Prepare the court, 4 words fell. His hand already rested on the edge of the desk. Above, the gavel sat silent, not yet struck, but the gathered force quivered the dust on the tabletop into a barely visible tremor. The courtroom's air congealed like iron. When Cain heard the words death by 1,000 cuts, his pupils shrank to pinpricks. In his mind, flesh parted under 3,600 blades. His knees buckled, slamming onto the green brick, the neck cang grating with a tooth-aching squeal. My lord, injustice, injustice. He hammered his forehead down without care for his own life, thud after thud, sweat spattering into the brick cracks, each drip deafening in the dead, silent chamber. His voice, hoarse and cracking, ricocheted among the carved beams, buzzing in lingering echoes. Magistrate Liu, seated behind the bench, arched a brow. Didn't you already confess everything? What more is there? Cain wrenched his head up, face a mess of blood and mud. I didn't kill the woman. Someone told me to take the blame. My lord, see the truth, see the truth. At those words, the atmosphere in the courtroom convulsed. Everyone could hear it now. The real blood on this case belonged to someone else. Madame Wang's death, it could not be separated from Soren's name. It must have been Soren who forced himself on her, then, fearing she'd report him, silenced her that very night, faked a suicide, and found a thief to take the fall. Pity he chose a man with a spine like wet clay. The onlookers outside the court erupted in an uproar, but Asher heard none of it. His focus narrowed to the trembling, broken figure on the stones, and to the weight of truth finally clawing its way into the light. He stared at the magistrate, expressionless. Seated beneath the plaque that read "Clarity reflects all," the case was not over. Cain's recanting was a rusted knife, slicing through old scars, dragging the buried house of kin back into the mire. An hour later, the rear court of the Bureau of Scrutiny. The scent of tea still clung to the air. Earl First Class Dorian clenched his fist. Knuckles cracked like snapping twigs, veins bulging on the back of his hand, writhing like living worms toward his wrist. He glared at Magistrate Liu before him, forcing words through gritted teeth. Wasn't that case already closed? How did it sprout new thorns? Magistrate Liu lifted his teacup. The porcelain was fine, icy to the touch. His fingertips tightened. Crack. A hair-thin fracture of ceramic splintered the silence. Beneath the cup's base, a spiderweb of cracks spread without a sound. He lifted his eyes, impassive, his voice a calm blade. Then ask yourselves, if you needed a scapegoat, why pick a coward who values his own skin above all else? Before I could even question him, he dropped to his knees and confessed everything. I would have helped if I could, there was no time. Earl Dorian's face twisted into something barely human. My son is dead, and you expect me to let these eyesores walk free. That old bastard, that fool's entire family, they all have to die. Magistrate Liu slammed his palm against the desk. A teacup leaped, cracked porcelain, shrieking through the air like a blade. His gaze turned sharper than a honed edge. Earl Dorian, do you think the censors of the censorate are all dead? Or do you imagine the assassin who killed your son wouldn't dare kill you as well? You need them alive, and unharmed. I'd rather not wake one morning to news that Earl Dorian has been assassinated. Ice water. A bucket of it drenched his rage. His son was dead. Grief and fury had blinded him, and this case had him stumbling over his own feet. The assassin moved like a ghost. That was the true sword hanging over his neck. Earl Dorian stood silent for a long moment, then ground out, "And what would you have me do, magistrate?" Magistrate Liu's voice flattened, devoid of even a ripple. What's done is done. If Earl Dorian wants to walk away clean, lay everything at your son's feet. All the crimes were his alone. You knew nothing, the veins on Dorian's temple bulged. My son is dead, and you still, exactly because he's dead. Magistrate Liu cut in, there's no one left to pursue. Unless you'd rather find another scapegoat. Earl Dorian's mouth clamped shut. He had already been burned once. Finding another scapegoat risked fresh complications, sinking him deeper into the mire. This was the best path. The only path. After a long silence, he raised his head and clasped his fists toward Magistrate Liu. These past days, I've been in your debt, Magistrate Liu. I will remember this kindness and repay it in time. Magistrate Liu rose with a smile and saw him out through the back gate. The moment the door thudded shut, the smile scraped off his face like flesh under a blade. Teacher. He spat hard at the flagstones, disgust undisguised. Asher never learned the details of that back-office conference. But the case was closed. Soren was dead. The Bureau of Scrutiny had cleared Madame Wang's name, and for her family, that was the only salve left on the edge of the cliff. Walking back to Lin Mansion beneath a midday sun that flooded the streets, hawkers' cries rising and falling, Asher passed that same corner from the night before. A yellow mutt lay by the trash heap, spine arched like a drawn bow, ribs stark beneath a coat so thin the sunlight washed it in a frail, brittle gold. It caught the scent of roasting meat from the butcher's stall next door. Throat working, creeping closer, a stick was already swinging. Get lost. Stray dogs ruined trade. It fled back to the corner, tail tucked, settling into the same hollow, ribs heaving with each breath, a low whimper slipping from its throat now and then. Some time later, a thick, greasy aroma invaded its nostrils. It sniffed, then jerked its eyes open. Chicken legs. A pork hock. A human crouched before it, unwrapping oiled paper. The scent of rendered fat thickened until it felt almost solid. 2 chicken legs and a hock lay in the paper, glossy with oil, enough to dizzy its sight. Asher knelt and pushed the packet closer. Eat, the dog understood. It plunged its muzzle down, tearing and gulping, crunching the smallest bones to splinters. It licked the paper 3 times, tongue sweeping across the surface and catching a faint, fleeting chill like a shard of frost that vanished as soon as it touched, yet utterly real. Then it circled Asher 6 times, tail whirring like a windmill. Asher tapped its head. That alley saved my life. If you're willing, stay with me from now on. As long as I have a bite to eat, you won't go hungry. At the Peace Earl's mansion, the servants scrubbed the stray down so many times the stench finally surrendered. Asher crouched and patted its head again. From now on, your name is Saffron. Saffron seemed to understand. It circled him a few times, then trotted to the mansion gate and settled against the wall. Its eyes never rested, tracking every passerby with more vigilance than the household guards. Magnus's poison had been purged, but he still needed a few days' rest before he was fully healed. The imperial capital was still the imperial capital. There were those who wanted him dead, but few would dare an attack inside a noble's residence, not like that female assassin. Safe, yes, but being trapped at home all day brought another layer of awkwardness for Asher. He spent more time with Nelav Linti and Vienna. Vienna treated him too well, her gaze full of a tender affection that Asher understood deep down was meant for another Asher. That warmth kindled a glow in his chest and also tore him with contradictions. At dinner, Vienna kept piling food into his bowl, her chopsticks darting with a careful, aching love. Asher couldn't bear the intensity. He bolted down his rice, muttered an excuse about being full, and fled to his room. Cultivating the unorthodox arts devoured strength and stamina at a ferocious rate, and his appetite had grown to match. Not yet midnight, hunger clawed him awake. His stomach burned like a furnace. He was about to slip into the kitchen and scrounge for anything edible when a knock sounded at his door. The wooden panel creaked open. Night wind spilled in from the corridor's depths, and Asher looked up to see Vienna standing outside, a porcelain bowl in her hands, the rising steam softening the fine lines around her eyes. It's so late, do you need something? I noticed you didn't eat much tonight, so I came to check. Her voice was quiet, as if afraid of disturbing anything. If you're hungry, I can boil some noodles for you. No, I'm not. Gurgle. Before he could finish, his belly gave a traitorous rumble loud in the silent corridor. Vienna smiled faintly and said nothing more. She turned and vanished into the darkness. Not long after, she reappeared with a rough clay bowl. Clear broth, almost thin, with a few emerald greens drifting on the surface, and 2 poached eggs nestled at the bottom, their yolks wobbling gently. Steam curled up, veiling her face. Asher took the bowl and bent his head to eat. A bowl of plain noodle soup, nothing special, but he ate it achingly slow. Every strand he lifted with his chopsticks seemed to carry a weight he had to taste fully. Every swallow of broth made his throat quiver and his eyes sting. He drained the last drop, licked the bowl clean, and set it down. His voice came out hoarse. Thank you. Vienna reached out and stroked his hair, her fingers brushing his forehead, her gaze pure tenderness. Silly child. No need to thank your mother. Just tell me whatever you want to eat, and I'll make it. That look, that doting, it was something Asher had craved with every fiber of his being in his previous life and never possessed. He was silent for a moment, his throat working. Then he nodded, and his voice came rough and low. I know, mother. This was the first time he had truly spoken that word. In the deep hush of night, Asher lay alone on his bed and felt, for the first time, that the heavens had not been unkind. Perhaps it was a reward for some buried store of virtue, for instead of shredding him into oblivion, the meteor strike had delivered him into all of this. That night held no dreams. Peace absolute and unbroken. Morning light cut through the carved window lattices. Asher washed, dressed, and stepped into the front courtyard. The household servants stood assembled in a silent rank. Nelav, Linti, and Vienna waited at the front. He approached them without hesitation, and spoke with an easy, natural tone. Father, mother. What is happening? Vienna turned her head, her gaze resting on him a long moment before she spoke. Last night, your father and I went over the accounts. The silver is almost gone. We can no longer afford so many hands. Better to release them now to seek their own paths, rather than keep them tethered to a sinking ship. Summoning the imperial physician had hollowed out half the House of Lin's remaining fortune. No one needed to say it aloud. Vienna faced the line of servants, her voice even but carrying a deep weariness. The House of Lin is a shadow of what it once was. Staying here offers you nothing but dulled prospects. Today I return your indentures to you. Each of you will also receive 10 taels of silver for the road. Those who wished to leave freely. Silence pooled in the courtyard. One by one, a handful of maids and manservants stepped forward. The air was so still, you could hear the morning sparrows trilling beyond the walls. They reached out and took their contracts. The crisp rasp of paper was a severance, an irreversible splintering of bonds that had held for years. They accepted the silver, dropped to their knees, and knocked their heads hard against the ground. Then they rose, silent, and retreated to their quarters to pack their belongings. The manor gate was pushed open. Dawn flooded in. Dust motes swirled in the beam, dancing above the vanishing silhouettes. Many walked away. But 4 figures remained rooted like ancient trees, silent and immovable. Vienna looked at a middle-aged woman among them. The woman smiled, and her words fell like warm rain. "Madame, I've spent my whole life cooking for House of Lynn. I have no other trade. If you and the Lord do not despise my meals, let me stay." Beside her, the stooped old gatekeeper cleared his throat. His aged voice scraped out, thin but steady. "This old servant has only a few years left. All I hope is that the Lord and Madame, remembering the bond of many years, will one day grant me a coffin to hold my bones. Then I will have no regrets." Magnus gave his answer with brutal simplicity. He drew himself upright, the wounds beneath his bandages seeping faint blooms of crimson at the motion. "I'm not leaving either." The last was a young woman, her face set like flint. She bit off each word. "I will follow Madame all my life," and so the dust settled. Old Wang, Magnus, Aunt Wang, Luna. With the others gone, the already faded Lin mansion felt hollowed out. A chill of decay seeped into every corner, the aura of a house crumbling, its people scattered. Asher walked the streets. His heart held a different flavor. Ridiculous when he thought about it. In his former life, he possessed nothing but money. In this life, he possessed everything but money. Doting parents. A caring sister-in-law. A guard who would throw his own life down to protect him. A home. Even a dog. A man must learn what it means to have enough. Yet in this bizarre, radiant world, even with no ability at all, he had no desire to go back. He would pour out every last effort to protect this family he had been given, fragile as it was. And with Lynn Mansion crumbling by the day, he had to do something. The heat on the street was unnatural. The paving stones radiated a shimmering furnace. Glow. Heat waves warped the air itself, the eaves of distant buildings and the shadows of passers, by rippled and deformed in the searing updrafts. Asher glanced over his shoulder at Magnus. "You're still recovering. Go back and rest." "I won't be long." Magnus shook his head at once. His voice was a low rumble of loyalty. "I'd rather stay with the young master. It puts my mind at ease." As he spoke, a fat bead of sweat rolled down his forehead, tracked through the bloodstain, seeping into his bandages, and dripped onto the blue flagstone at his feet. It evaporated on contact. Truth was, Magnus wanted rest too. But the heat was infernal, the manor baked like a steam basket. Staying close to the young master was just cooler. Only a few souls were out on the street, all of them hugging the slivers of shade along the walls and cursing as they went. Blasted weather, how can it be this hot? My robes are soaked through already. Fragrant pavilion ran out of ice ages ago. It's a boiler in there now. No one's got the energy for anything. Summer's going to kill us this year. From the highest nobles to the common beggars, all of imperial capital was being slowly crushed beneath the weight of the heat. Asher lifted his head. The sunlight slashed down like a cleaver. A searing white wheel of fire branded itself into his pupils. A faint film of sweat purled at his temple. Unthinking, he rubbed his fingertips together. A few crystalline grains of ice formed in that tiny fold of skin, then vanished into an imperceptible wisp of vapor. A bolt of clarity, cold and sharp as a cracked glacier, lanced through his mind. He could use his power to make money. Imperial capital had sweltered for days under a relentless high heat. Ice had become a treasure no amount of silver could buy. The rich merchants and aristocratic princes clutching their gold were helpless unless they possessed an ability like his. Freezing water was far easier for him than conjuring ice from nothing. The difficulty of the two tasks didn't even belong in the same conversation. And in all of great Zia imperial capital, he was the only one who could do it. An opportunity. A heaven-sent golden opportunity. Asher paced the street, his thoughts churning at a dead run. This blistering weather would hold for a month at most, then slowly cool. the desperate hunger for relief would fade. If he meant to seize this profit, he had to act fast. The location needed to be near the manors of the wealthy and influential. Those people were swaddled in luxury, they wouldn't blink at parting with silver. He also needed a spot with easy access to water. A well, ideally. He stopped walking. An idea flickered through his mind, then he snuffed it out the instant it was born. Rent a residence and sell ice from there. The thought flared and died. Every estate in the core of imperial capital was already claimed by a master of stature. The few empty properties were commanding rents that Lynn Mansion's purse couldn't even dream of touching. Without starter capital, even holding the secret to a fortune was nothing but an empty fantasy. This chance at a monopoly was slipping away by the hour. With every day of delay, silver streamed through his fingers like water. Asher crushed down the tangled calculations, dragged his gaze from the deep-walled manors, and swept it along the storefronts lining the street. This was the gold, sink of imperial capital, pleasure halls, music houses, wine shops, and tea pavilions, all dripping with ostentatious luxury. Whatever establishment could keep its footing here did not lack for money. His eyes locked onto a target. He strode toward a towering restaurant, Moonpluck Pavilion. At high noon, this, the most famed establishment in all imperial capital, sat practically deserted. Heat flooded in from every angle, tidal and punishing. The air inside shimmered, cooked into submission. The attendants slumped near the tables, robes soaked to the skin and plastered to their bodies, each breath a scorching labor. The ice chests had been dry for hours. The hall was an oven. Who would willingly linger here a moment longer than necessary? As Asher stepped through the main door, the ferocious blaze of the street crashed against the stifling, damp heat within. It struck his face like an invisible wall of pressure. He did not pause. He threaded his way past the listless attendants and went deeper inside. A servant struggled to his feet, forcing a smile. "What'll it be, sir? I'm not here to eat." Asher cut straight to it. "Fetch the proprietor." The servant blinked, on the verge of bristling, until he took in the young man's bearing. The cloth was unassuming, but there was an ineffable weight to his presence, a quiet authority that didn't need silk to announce itself. He swallowed his retort and vanished into the back. Moments later, a heavy-set middle-aged man pushed through the curtain, reluctance plain on his face. His pea-sized eyes flicked over Asher, and a tight smile worked its way onto his lips as he clasped his hands. "To what does the Moonpluck Pavilion owe the pleasure, young master?" "Your name, if I may." Asher wasn't in the mood for pleasantries. He extended his palm, slow and deliberate. Frost bloomed in the hollow of his hand, delicate, silent. A skin of ice spread outward, crystalline threads crawling across his fingers, thickening by the heartbeat. The air condensed into mist. On the wooden table beside them, white veins of frost etched themselves into the grain, branching like a spider's web. The crushing heat split open. Cold slid through the stifling room like a blade. The proprietor flinched as if struck. The chill burrowed through his skin, sinking into the marrow. His small eyes flared, the gleam of a wolf catching a blood scent. He lunged forward, both hands clamping around Asher's ice-rimed fingers. The frozen touch jolted him again, but he didn't dare loosen his grip. He held on as though the young man might slip through his grasp like thawing water. "Upstairs, young master." "We'll talk upstairs, a private chamber on the second floor." Tea was served, steam coiling into the heat. Asher lifted his cup. The rising haze swirled, thickened, turned to cold fog before his lips. A thin skin of ice filmed the surface. He sipped the chilled tea and met the proprietor's burning stare. Straight to it. "I'll use your well." 10 taels of silver a day. The proprietor's eyes narrowed. He leaned back, sharp little glints dancing in those pea-shaped pupils, and bared his teeth in a grin. Young master jests. "This heatwave's an unnatural thing. Imperial capital's ice stores are nearly gutted. Supplies dried up. With your talents, you could mint a fortune. 10 taels a day. You'd be trading at a loss." He paused, then thrust out an open hand. "In my humble opinion, the figure should be at least this, 50 taels. Done." Asher smacked the table. The teacup rattled. "I like a man who's direct. Since the Moonpluck Pavilion is so generous, I won't trouble the competition." The proprietor's smile froze. His brow furrowed. He leaned forward, voice tightening. "Am I to understand the 50 taels would be paid by the Moonpluck Pavilion?" "To you?" Asher didn't spare him a glance. He rose. The hem of his robe swept through the muggy air, dragging a faint, cool current behind it. Flecks of frost, still clinging to the table, stirred in the draught and fell silently between them. If the proprietor can't be serious, we're done here. Fragrance Breeze Pavilion across the way. I imagine they'll be more reasonable. He turned toward the door. Stay, young master. Please, a frantic cry from behind. The proprietor nearly threw himself across the room, snatching at Asher's sleeve. His fingertips met the lingering cold trapped in the fabric, and a shiver racked his arm. But he clenched the cloth and refused to let go. Sweat beaded his brow. He'd thought to play dumb to twist the moment to his advantage. Now it was painfully clear who the fool was. Imperial capitals, ice houses, were on the verge of dust. This man, this anomaly, stood alone. If he walked into the Fragrance Breeze Pavilion's arms, the Moonpluck Pavilion would watch its rival claw back from the brink. That thought alone could drive a man to his grave. 10 taels, the proprietor ground the words out. Just supply ice to the Moonpluck Pavilion. 10 taels a day. Asher stopped. He half-turned, the ghost of a smile playing at his lips. His voice carried the calm of still water. The proprietor himself said it. Scorching weather, ice more precious than gold. Supply dried up. With my knack of fortune's nothing. 10 taels a day. Seems a touch low. The proprietor's throat locked. Those were his own words, hurled back like a dagger. He felt the blow in his chest. His cheek muscles twitched. What figure would the young master find fitting? 50 taels. The proprietor's face twisted in pain, but he saw no room for bargaining in Asher's eyes. 50 it is. He bit down so hard, his back teeth creaked. But the young master must swear no other house in the capital gets a sliver of ice. Asher arched an eyebrow. That changes the price. We'll have to negotiate further. 5 times. The proprietor slammed the table. 5 times the standard rate. Asher smiled, a slow, easy thing, and extended his hand. A pleasure doing business. The rear courtyard. By the well. The Moonpluck Pavilion sprawled wide, a maze of rock formations and pavilions, all of it simmering under the sun's hammer. The stone lip of the well scorched to the touch. Servants hauled bucket after bucket, water sloshing in the light, its brief coolness dying the instant it met the air. Ripples shimmered, barely visible. Asher washed his hands and stooped low. He laid his palm against the surface of a bucket. Contact. The ripples froze mid-crest. A blade, sharp cold, plunged from his hand into the water. The frostbound gift Lyra had bestowed. Mist billowed from the buck its rim. Ice spread from the point of contact, tendrils racing outward with a sound like snapping glass. Fog boiled up like a pale dragon coiling in the heat. Chill peeled the oppressive warmth back layer by layer until frost dusted even the stonework by the well. In moments, the whole bucket hardened into a block of ice, surface mirror, smooth, catching the blaze of the sun and throwing it back in fractured light. The proprietor stood watching each bucket yield to that touch, the fervor in his eyes threatening to spill over. The heat wave had a sinister edge to it this year. Ice was worth more than gold. If the Moonpluck Pavilion became the sole refuge of cool air in the imperial capital, the nobles would flock here like pilgrims. The profits went beyond mere silver. Asher froze bucket after bucket, but his movements grew heavier. Sweat traced lines down his temples. His breath came uneven. The world swam once, a soft lurch at the edge of vision. The hollowing drain of depleted power spread through his limbs, the frostbound gift ebbing low. He drew back, eased himself down against a shaded wall, and closed his eyes. Silent and still, he waited for the well of ice within him to replenish.